bulbs off of our flower bed. All of them. Just dug up. You didn't like them in there.
Oh yeah. Okay. Sorry, we were late to the line and late getting out of the line and getting our getting our meal done. I apologize if you would appreciate this even more if you realized how much me and George have had to go through to get this to set up and actually work. I was reviewing my two presentations for today this morning, and both of them disappeared.
Oh no!
All of the images just disappeared while I was at it. Unfortunately, I was able to find somebody who knew more about computers than I did, and we were able to recover one of them. But this particular one, we weren't able to recover all of it. So I'm just going to share a couple of slides that I do have of it, and we'll go through it quickly. We're going to actually cover the material that's on this in the other presentation. So we're going to jump to the fundamentals presentation. But I just wanted to share this with you. I was thinking about this one day, and it just struck me that almost everything you need to grow a garden is free. So let's look at some of those. I just put this Bible verse from Matthew 10:8 up here. Freely you have received, freely give. Go back and read what it says to do right before this on there when you have a chance. But the verse is the rest of it right before this on it. So we'll go through the ones that I have on here, and then we'll just cover the others because we're gonna touch them. We're gonna touch on all of them anyway in the other presentations. I just wanted to point this out in particular because a lot of times we don't think about, how much God has provided for us, that it comes at no expense, basically. So what's the first thing that's free? Anybody want to guess? What's the first thing that's free to us? What? Sunshine. That's right. You have a limitless amount of energy coming from the sun every single day, right? Of course, if it's cloudy, you might have a little bit of an issue with the sunshine sometimes, but there is, even with some of that, there is still more than enough energy for us to do just about anything that we want. The question is, how do you capture that energy? How do you benefit from that energy? What do you have to have? You have to have a plant that grows and produces chlorophyll and can capture that energy and convert it into. So let me just go past this. That was what I had for sunshine. I have a couple of them up here, but I thought I'd be a little bit kiddish on a few of these things. It's good. I actually had a serious one too for the sunshine. But you need plants. You need growing plants to capture that energy. Have any of you ever flown in an airplane over the United States? And what do you see when you're looking down a lot of the time? Well, you see clouds, but what if you don't run any clouds? You could see the earth.
You see fields and they're shaped in a circle for where they irrigate.
Yeah, so sometimes you see them with something green on them, right? If you were to fly frequently, you would discover that those fields are bare about 6 to 7 months out of the year, and they're not growing anything. So what are you missing out on? What are you losing if you don't have something growing there? You're not capturing the energy, right? You don't have the energy, and you'll see as we go through this that's a tremendous loss to not be gaining that energy. Can anybody think? Somebody mentioned something a minute ago. What else do you think you have for free?
Water. The
The air we breathe. Okay. Yeah. We had soil life. Those are actually all part of it. So air. Let me just jump here. Here's the photosynthetic formula here. Now this is not an accurate formula because it should be 6 carbon dioxide atoms or molecules and 6 water molecules produce 1 glucose molecule and oxygen. This is how we get oxygen into the air. Is plants utilizing CO2, carbon dioxide, and giving off oxygen and providing the energy and the oxygen to us. And I put another slide in here just to reverse of that. When we burn that energy, it goes back the other way, and you gain energy, chemical energy out of it, and some heat, and it goes back to water and carbon dioxide. And yep, and remember that we'll remember that when we talk about when we get into carbon fertility and everything. But in the air, there are multiple free things that we need. One, obviously, is oxygen, right? Well, plants need oxygen too. If plants can't get oxygen into the soil to the roots, then they can't grow and be productive. And so we're going to talk about, okay, what's the problem if the air can't. The way to describe it is the soil needs to be able to breathe. Remember I talked about in Genesis where I said man was formed from the dust of the earth, and the breath of life was breathed into his nostrils. Soil needs to actually be able to breathe, and tidal influences on the soil actually make it breathe. Where, like the moon, you've seen tides with water, right? Where when the tide comes in with the lunar gravity and everything, and then the Earth's gravity pulls more, and then the moon's pulls more, and it'll pull the tide up and let it down. Same thing happens in the soil. It pulls water up through the soil, and then it goes back down in the soil. And when that happens, it actually pushes air out, pulls the air back in. But the soil needs to be able to breathe. If it can't breathe, then what the problem right now is we have a bunch of soil with emphysema. It's struggling to get enough air into it because of the practices that are being utilized.
More CO2 in the atmosphere now?
I'm going to get to that.
Okay.
I'm going to get to that question. It's a big issue right now.
I know in Canada we're taxed on it now, carbon tax.
Right. Yeah. Not solving the problem, but it's making more money for the government.
Yeah.
Carbon dioxide, I'll just say it's not a problem. I'll explain why. In fact, if we want to go there, carbon dioxide is only 0.04% of the composition of the air, and but we need CO2. You saw that formula that I just saw. Without carbon dioxide, you can't capture energy and build sugars, right? So what happens if they decide that they're going to start drilling holes and injecting all the CO2 and all the carbon and everything into the ground? They're going to start killing people. People will start dying. Things will start dying. We're close to the lowest level we should be at. If you're at 200, we're between 350 and 400 parts per million ambient in the atmosphere right now. If we ever got to 250, things would just start dying because there's not enough. But the important thing to know is, and we're going to talk about it more as we go on here, is that CO2 is necessary for storing energy and then being able to utilize that energy later. It's very important in the growing system, and the problem is that the cycle is messed up. The ability to cycle CO2 in the atmosphere is problematic, and we're going to touch on some of that. I just want to go through these. What do you see as the biggest, that makes up the biggest amount of gas in the air? Nitrogen. Did plants use nitrogen? Why there's 30,000 tons of nitrogen above every acre. 30,000 tons above every acre. And yet agriculture spends tens of billions of dollars on nitrogen fertilizer. So that's the question is, it's inert. It's a triple charged double atom of nitrogen, N2 with three bonds, and so it's a really tight bond. It's hard to break. And has anybody heard of the Haber-Bosch process? I know it was developed in Germany in World War I, and it was designed to fix nitrogen out of the air to produce bombs. And it was perfected more, and of course they were looking at, when people were putting materials on prior to the green, what we call the green revolution, they were harvesting bat guanos and marine guanos from seabirds and a variety of places to try to get, and then recycling manures and things like that back onto the soil. But it wasn't sufficient to produce enough crops to feed the population. And actually, I don't remember if it was World War I or World War II in Germany, they started digging up all the graves to get the phosphorus out of the bones to build for fertilizer to grow food and everything because of the issues that were going on with all of that. But you have all of this nitrogen, and if your soil is able to exchange air and everything, you're getting lots of nitrogen into the soil, but plants can't get it. So did God just put it there as a mockery?
No.
You got all this nitrogen, and I'm going to go, yeah, that's right. No. I gave you all this nitrogen, but you can't have it. Well, the truth is that there is a way to get it. There are natural systems. Some of you have heard, if you plant legumes like beans or peas or things like that, and you put an inoculant on it, because there are microorganisms, bacteria that are symbiotic who, and I think I have a picture of this here that I still have, that are symbiotic with leguminous plants, and when you inoculate it with these bacteria, they'll set nodules on the roots and they'll fix nitrogen. Now, I'll show you a picture here in just a second, but there's billions in these little nodules. If you ever if you have bean plants or something, you pull them up and see if you have the little nodules formed on there, and then cut it open and see what color it is. If it's pink, it's actively fixing nitrogen. If it's gray, it's dead. There's nothing happening there. And something that people don't think about, like in a commercial field crop rotation where they'll plant corn and they'll apply nitrogen fertilizer to the corn, but they won't apply any nitrogen to soybeans. They'll rotate soybeans because soybeans are a legume. They fix it with an inoculant, assuming that it's going to fix the nitrogen. We won't talk about what really happens there and everything, but in order to produce a 70 bushel soybean crop, you have to generate about 350 to 400 pounds of nitrogen in about 60 days. That's a lot of nitrogen that those little bacteria are generating in a very short period of time on it. And most people don't think about that because they're not putting nitrogen fertilizer. Oh, well, they don't need nitrogen. They're making their own nitrogen. I think. Okay, so the question was, does lightning fix nitrogen? Yes, lightning does fix some nitrogen. It's not a huge amount of nitrogen, but it does fix the nitrogen. So, but what about, is that the only way that you can get nitrogen fixed, is by growing legumes in your soil? It's not. There are all kinds of free living, and this is one of the slides I lost, but there's also all kinds of free living organisms in the soil. Azotobacter, Aspergillus, Pseudomonas, Bacillus, cyanobacteria, and everything. All free living can fix nitrogen in the soil. But what happens when you apply soluble nitrogen to the soil is you basically just shut down the relationship of the plant with those free living organisms. What happens is, and I think we're going to get into more of this as we go through some of the more fundamental stuff, is the plant actually gives away as much as 50%, sometimes at any given time up to 75% of all of that energy it's capturing, all of that work it's putting in, it's giving it away. It's dumping it out its roots into the soil, and it's dumping it out as very specific compounds, saying, I need this kind of bacteria, I need this kind of mycorrhizal fungi, I need this and everything. And so it cultivates these communities to help it. And so it establishes this relationship with them, and it's like investing and putting money into your bank account. And eventually you earn interest on that bank account, and by building these populations and everything, when the plant really needs a higher level of these nutrients, it's already got the crew there to provide it. And modern agriculture and the reason we've gone to soluble nitrogen, for example, one, it's convenient, but it's very energy intensive to make it. That's one of the slides I missed too. I lost too. Is on the Haber-Bosch process, where they take atmospheric nitrogen, and they get hydrogen from natural gas, and using high pressure, high heat environments, they can convert it into ammonia, and then they can dissolve it and turn it into ammonium nitrogen, and then from there they can turn it into nitric acid and on into nitrate. And of course, the reason it got so prominent in agriculture is because what happened at the end of the war? Well, to a large extent, not to a total extent, but to a large extent, they stopped needing bombs. They weren't blowing things up and destroying them. So, but they had this huge industry that had been developed, and so somebody said, "Well, plants use nitrogen, so let's sell it to the farmers. We can increase yields and all of that." A lot of people don't know what actually happened when that started. Is the higher levels of nitrogen that were being applied, plants started falling over. A lot of things happened out of this, like wheat. Wheat used to be, have you ever driven by a wheat field lately? How tall is the wheat? Little short stuff. Wheat used to be 4 to 5 feet tall. And growers that are actually using these older varieties of wheat are producing 200, 250 bushels to the acre of wheat. Whereas here, 100 bushels is a really good yield. But what happened is they got great growth out of the plant, but the plant got too flimsy and weak, and it started falling over. They call it lodging. So the plants started all falling over, and so they were losing the crop because they couldn't harvest it. So the industry was in a panic and had to figure out what's actually going on here. And they discovered that, well, there's not enough potassium for the amount of nitrogen that you're putting on. So potassium provides stalk strength along with copper and manganese. Gives you stalk strength. So they said, well, you need to put more potassium on. So they started putting more potassium on, and they got the lodging problem more or less taken care of. But another problem materialized. The livestock consuming the grain and the grass and such that they were using it on became infertile. And so back to the lab we go, and discovered that, well, it was a phosphorus deficiency. There wasn't enough phosphorus compared to the amount of nitrogen and everything, and so that was interfering with the hormonal process in the animals, and they weren't reproducing. So you just need to add some more phosphorus. You get the progression here that's going on here. Well, the thing is that they kind of stopped with that because now they could get the yields and they could get the animals to reproduce. They increased yields as a result of that. But something else happened. They diluted all the rest of the fertility in the crop. Because let's say you're producing 100 bushels and now you're producing 150. But you didn't change the trace mineral levels or any other levels of any of the other nutrients in the soil. You just watered them down. And that's been an ongoing phenomena. That's why you'll see that that one slide that I showed you, where the mineral content in foods is dropping pretty dramatically. And in order to get the same amount, you've probably read some of those things where in order to get the same amount, like it'd take 20 apples to get the same amount of nutrition that you could have got 50 years ago. Well, who can eat 20 apples? Wouldn't you rather just eat one apple that tasted really good and had all the nutrition in it that you needed? So this is the world that we're in agriculture. Is you got distortions and deficiencies and imbalances and all kinds of things going on. But that's a long deviation from the reality. Is that we've kind of wrecked the natural nitrogen cycling system, which we need to restore. And we're going to talk about, how do you restore that. And there's more than one reason you want to do that. One, most of the nitrogen sources that you have access to today are pretty risky in one way or another. Putting highly soluble nitrogen on creates a lot of problems, unless you can dole it out over small quantities and apply it, because a plant can only use so much at one time. If you put this big load of soluble nutrition on the soil, it's going to probably take up way more than it can do anything with at one particular time, and you're going to wind up with insect pressure, disease pressure as a result of that. I'll just give one illustration. We're going to come back to it. Anybody had problems with aphids in their garden? This is an easy one to address. Aphids, and we're gonna talk about this when I have the plant health pyramid here. Every single insect problem, disease problem, and weed pressure has a cause. If you remove the cause, you remove the problem. And I'm just going to illustrate the aphids here. Aphids cannot digest amino acids or more complex. So they can't digest amino acids, they can't digest peptides, they can't digest whole proteins. They have to have simple nitrate nitrogen. They can't even utilize ammonium nitrogen. They have to have simple nitrate nitrogen, and they build their own amino acids and proteins from it. And they cannot digest the others. So if you have aphids on your plant, what do you think you have in your plant? You have free nitrate. Nitrate and ammonia that's taken up into the plant on a 24-hour basis should be all metabolized into protein, amino acids or proteins within that 24-hour period. There should be no free nitrate or ammonia in that plant. And we'll talk a little bit more about what happens with ammonia in the plant. It's a different set of organisms that go after that. And if you have free ammonia in the plant, it's like putting a neon sign up that says, "The restaurant is open, come eat." But if you correct the issue with why that, and a lot of times it's molybdenum, which is a mineral, a nutritional element most people have never even heard of. Excuse me, molybdenum. It's only required in about 2 to 4 pounds in a 2 million pound plow layer. 1 to 2 parts per million. But it's required for the nitrate reductase and nitrogenase enzymes. In other words, it's required to metabolize nitrate nitrogen. And most of the time, when people have aphid problems, if we just spray a little bit of molybdenum on the plant, the aphids just disappear because their food source just left. They can't eat anymore. And so this is just one illustration. We're going to go up the chart. We're going to go up the chart and show you how disease problems, insect problems, whether they're simple digestive systems or chewing insects, on up there, how you eliminate those problems by correctly addressing fertility in your soil. Anyway, another side note, but the other reason that you want to be concerned about nitrogen and establishing this natural cycling is because they're not going to allow you to utilize nitrogen pretty soon. It's going to be banned. A big reason being because it's been abused, and you've got contamination as a result of it. It can contaminated groundwater and a variety of things like that. And so it's going to become highly regulated. Phosphorus is going to go the same way. And another thing I would point out to you back to the CO2. An article came out a few months back that asserted that home gardens produce 5 times as much CO2 emissions as conventional agriculture does. It's a lie, but if you don't understand what's all going on here, now why would they come out with an article like that, claiming that home gardens are producing 5 times the CO2 emissions?
Right. They demonize home gardens, make them the culprit, so that they can encourage going to the mass. So
they can prevent you from growing your own garden. That's so you can eat your bugs. And so what we're going to be talking about over the next couple of days, I strongly encourage you to seriously consider, because we have an opportunity to witness to the world relative to this. What if they come to you and they say, I'm sorry, you can't use nitrogen anymore? Well, I'm not using nitrogen. Well, you can't use phosphorus anymore. I'm not. Well, you're emitting too much CO2. No, I'm not. Test it. You know, you're already, because you were following the right course and the way God wants things to be, that you're already in compliance. They can't bring any accusation against you with it. But I will tell you, you don't have a lot more time to get there at the rate that they're pushing all of this stuff. So, but again, nitrogen is free, oxygen is free, CO2 is free. We won't look at any of the other gases in there. And we'll talk more about carbon dioxide. I think I had a picture that was really interesting, and I'll show it because I could move it to the other slide, but I'll just show it since I have it here. Does anybody know what that is? No? Okay, you will in just a minute. This here is a root. Is a plant root. All of these little things here are root hairs. You see this big thing here? There's several of them here. Some of them are blurry, but you see this big thing here? That's a big drop of sugar. That's all of that stuff is photosynthate being oozed out of the roots to feed microbes in the soil. I've got some more pictures we can see that, but I just found that one. I thought that was pretty cool. That it's a giving system. And if you understand how it properly works, then you will learn how to give. And you'll learn how to receive all of these things that God provided free for you. Okay, so how many did we cover? I need 7. We covered sunshine, we covered nitrogen, we covered oxygen, we covered carbon dioxide, water, okay? Now, I know that in some cases, some of you have to pay for your water. So God provided it free, and you'll see on one of the early slides that. Huh? Well, you've got dew in the morning, of course. Yeah, sure. But some people have limited amounts of water. Some people have too much water. Some people have water that's got problems with it and everything. So we lived in this world that George shared about, this groaning under the curse. But God provided the water, didn't he? Did man provide the water? You know, God provided the water, and he didn't discriminate. You know, I've heard people say, you know, my crops are failing because the farmer next door is evil. And God turned the rain off. God never turned the rain off. He never hid the sunshine or prevented any of these things. It's our own behavior. It's the things that we're doing that are creating the problems. But water is another freely given thing from God, and we need to freely receive it. How do we capture water in the soil? How do we maximize how much water is there without it causing a problem, so that we can benefit from it? Especially those people who have limited sources of water. And we'll talk about that when we get to that subject in carbon fertility.
Drip irrigation.
Yeah, drip irrigation is one way to make your water go a long way. And I'll talk about it, but potassium and zinc, they call the poor man's irrigation. Good potassium levels, good zinc levels help with increased water use efficiency in plants. And so if you have a situation where you've got limited water, you really want to make sure that you have those in really good levels, the levels that they need to be in on it. Let's see, do I have another slide here? I think I do. Okay, yeah, this is just a slide. I've got others of it, but this is just showing those rhizobium nodules on the legume plant. See all those little round things? And there's one of them cut open. Remember I said it would have that pink color if it was actively fixing nitrogen. Now, they create that nodule in order to create an anaerobic environment. Nitrogen has to be fixed without oxygen, so in an anaerobic environment. And that's why they create that nodule. And the same free-living organisms I talked about have to have an anaerobic environment in order to fix the nitrogen as well. So has anybody ever heard you say you need an aerobic soil? Well, that's not completely correct. You need a soil that breathes. That's the better way to describe it, because there will be pockets in a healthy breathing soil, there will be pockets in that soil that are anaerobic, and things that need to happen in that environment are able to happen. Whereas if well, we'll talk about it later. How people over-oxidize their soils and the problems that it creates. Okay, I'm just going to switch to my other, this is the last slide I'm pretty sure that I had. Yeah, lost everything else. So let me just switch to the other. Okay. I'm going to use this one. It wasn't the one that I wanted to use, but it will cover what we need to cover. We need to look at the principles that are involved in developing a healthy, balanced soil. What are those principles? What are the foundations of a healthy growing system? I put these two quotes up here. Some people get nervous with this first one, but I know what she meant by it, and I'll explain it. She says, everything, this is Lenny Marsh Wolf, she said, everything is so inseparably united. As soon as one begins to describe a flower, a tree, or a storm, or a chipmunk, up jumps the whole heavens and earth and God himself in one inseparable glory. What she's saying is that God's creation testifies to its creator, is what she's talking about. And she's actually quoting John Muir, the naturalist, who said, when you tug on one thing in nature, you discover it's connected to everything else. And that's a lesson we haven't learned very well, that we start tinkering with one thing, and I illustrated that with the nitrogen and the potassium and the phosphorus. We start tinkering with things we don't consider that it's actually affecting something else, and we have to understand what's actually being affected. And then I also put on here, speak to the earth and let it teach you, from Job 12:8. We need to go to what God created, that's what the Bible says, and let it speak to you. You know, Adam was able to speak to nature, and nature was able to speak to him in the garden before fall and everything. And really, if you've ever observed animals, have you ever seen a cow sticking his head through a fence, or a horse sticking their head through a fence to get grass on the other side when there's lots of grass right where they are? Why do you suppose they're doing that? If you've been around animals very much, you see them do all kinds of interesting things. Well, I can tell you that their sensory perception is much keener than humanity's. Not that humanity's couldn't be much more perceptive and much more sensitive to its surroundings. It's because we've dulled our senses to the world that's around us. And so that animal sticking his head through the fence knows that there's something better to eat on the other side of that fence. And they're going to put his head through there to get it. Otherwise, we would just eat the grass. And now if you fence an animal in and they have no choice, like if you put them in a feedlot operation, a confined feedlot operation, they have no choice and they'll eat whatever. And we'll talk about, I'll give another illustration here when we're talking about the different minerals. If you use like potassium chloride on pasture, and you use potassium sulfate on another pasture, and you give the animals the choice of which one they'll go to the potassium sulfate side all the time, because it's sweeter. The stuff that uses the chloride on is going to be bitter, and the stuff that uses sulfate on is going to be sweeter. And I've never seen an animal chose the one over the other, ever. They'll always go there, and there's reasons why. You never think of sulfur. When people think of sulfur, you think of, rotten egg smell. But actually, sulfur is one of those elements that produces amino acids dependent on sulfur that provides for sweetness. You never put the two together, would you? But it actually provides for sweetness. And you'll see that sulfur is one of the major elements missing now in soil fertility, and there's reasons why. And Yeah, we'll cover that when we get there. Okay, so there's just another illustration of photosynthesis. Requires a plant to capture the solar energy that's free to us. It requires carbon dioxide. It requires water to produce the carbohydrates, and then it gives oxygen back. And of course, you saw the formula. It goes the opposite direction when the plant's burning the energy. Just a real quick thing, because it popped in my head. When it reverses and has to burn energy, if there's not surplus energy stored in the plant has to go into start breaking itself down. So it has to start breaking proteins down and getting energy out of those. And what happens is you release ammonia into the plant tissue. And remember what I said in the restaurant, the neon sign comes on, and if you've got thrips and whiteflies and a few other organisms, they're coming after the ammonia in the plant. Spray them with a little bit of molasses or even a whole cane sugar, and the plant has energy. It'll rebuild, the ammonia disappears, and the bugs disappear on it. If they're there, it's because there's free ammonia there. Just like the aphids, if there's free nitrate there, they're most likely going to be there. And if you eliminate the source of the food, then you eliminate the problem. So I just want to show that again. And then I want to talk about this, because I don't think we comprehend our responsibility as stewards of the earth and the dust that we were made from. A recent survey of life on Earth measured in gigatons of carbon estimated that there are 550 gigatons of carbon-based life forms. A gigaton is a billion tons. And the reference is down there on the bottom. 450 gigatons of the 550 gigatons are in plants. So 4/5, a little less than 4/5 of the carbon is in plants. 93% of the remaining 100 gigatons are microbes. 4 gigatons of protists, 7 gigatons of archaea, 12 gigatons of fungi, and 70 gigatons of bacteria. So we now have 93% of that 550 gigatons. Of the last 7%, humans comprise 1/100th% of the biomass on Earth. 1/100th%. The question is, are we to cooperate with that, or are we in competition with it? That's a question you have to answer. I believe we should be cooperating with it. I think God created this incredible creation to support life. And we depend on all of these things that we don't even see. We don't even think about. Remember I said in the first class that, about 12 trillion human cells in each of us, and about 90 trillion bacterial cells in each of us. So if you want to look at that, we're 9/10 bacteria and we're 1/10 human. I look at it that way. Now that's not the way you should look at it, but my point is that we're way more dependent. God, I call these unseen agencies. It's like the representation of the angels. I mean, it's unseen agencies that help support life, and we can either learn to cooperate with them and let them. Nature knows how to do an awful lot of things way better than we do. And when we try to take over and manage these things our way, we tend to mess things up. And so what we need to do is go to the earth and let it teach us. Discover how things are supposed to be, how they're supposed to work, and let them work. Steward them so that they can actually work. And I mentioned this before, for he causes his sun to rise on the evil and the good, and sends the rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. God does not withhold his blessings from us. We block their reception. We interfere with our ability to receive the blessings that God has for us, because we've deformed and messed up a lot of the natural systems and the natural process that should be happening in order for us to be able to receive those blessings. And I mentioned in the first class too, all the problems in the world originate in the character of man or the character of the soil, both of them. And both can be addressed if we're willing. Okay, this is a principle I want you to remember Most of us spend our time fighting off death. Do you know that? And very little time actually fostering life. What happens when you turn a light on in a room? What happens to the darkness? When you foster life, you don't have to worry about death. But you know, in the agricultural world, we have bugs come, we have diseases come, we have weeds come, and what do? We kill them. We spray them with this or that or the other thing. This is the common practice of God's people in the Bible. We kill the messenger instead of hearing the message. Now, I'm not telling you not to spray for insects if they're killing your crop, but if you ignore the message, guess who's going to be coming back? They're going to keep coming back until you heed the message. They're telling you something about the conditions of your growing system. They're telling you something about the conditions in your soil. And you need to learn what that is, discover what it is, and foster what's right. Foster what's actually life-giving rather than fighting off the problem. We do this with sin all the time, where we're fighting our, sinful behavior, and we never get anywhere doing that. Instead of fostering life by focusing our hearts and minds on Christ and being transformed, being changed. The problem goes away when you replace it with life. So remember this one, because people spend most of their time and energy and money fighting off death, and they always lose. Okay, this is another one you need to understand. It's not about the presence of the germ, it's the terrain. This was a statement that was made by Antoine Beauchamp back, he was a contemporary of Louis Pasteur. You probably never heard of Antoine Beauchamp because you heard of Louis Pasteur. But they were contemporary researchers. Of course, you know that Louis Pasteur developed the germ theory. But what Beauchamp said was, no, it's not. He wasn't denying that there were organisms there that could be pathogenic. He was saying that it's not the presence of the organism, it's the condition of the host. And so I could give you illustrations on this. Two fields side by side, both have fusarium in them, which is a soil-borne fungal disease. Both have fusarium in the soil, same populations, everything. One plant succumbs to it, one field succumbs to it, the other field doesn't. Why not? Because God provided a food source for everything in His creation. And when that food source is removed, an alternative food source is pursued. And so an organism, fusarium can actually be beneficial to plants in a healthy soil system where the plant is actually feeding the fusarium. And we're going to get into that, how that happens. But the plant is actually providing the nourishment to the fusarium. The fusarium is not harming the plant. So it's the conditions that we need to be worried about. It's not the presence. There's all kinds of things going on around us in life. And we can't do anything about that being present. I mean, we can, separate ourselves from it to the extent that we can, but you can't isolate yourself from it. So it's about it's about strengthening the host and not the pathogen. We create enemies in our world. There would be no enemies if we didn't create hostile conditions in this situation. So now, can you get sick from a germ? Of course you can. But there has to be opportunity for that organism to be able to cause you to be sick. If your immune system is strong, your health is strong overall, it'll never bother you, even though it's present. And you'd be surprised what's present all around you. It doesn't bother. And I could tell some stories. I won't take the time because we started late here. Some illustrations of it that are pretty gross of alternative food sources. Okay. Seeds want to grow. You don't have to make them grow. You just have to put them into the ground and give them the favorable conditions, and they'll grow. They'll even germinate in unfavorable conditions. And what happens after they germinate in unfavorable conditions? They die because there's no capacity for them to thrive there. A seed can germinate because it has a little package of nutrition in it, and believe it or not, it actually has a little microbial package in it as well, of the microbes that it needs to depend on when it germinates and everything. Part of the problem with a lot of the seed vigor today is that microbial package has been killed out. And so the plants and the mineral package is pretty weak on top of that. But seeds want to grow. You don't have to force them to grow. The question is, will they grow and mature and bear fruit? That's the real question on it. But we don't have to force seeds to grow. They want to grow. You just have to let them and encourage them. And I just put that picture in there as an illustration of that. Okay. If I say, what is organic growth, what would you tell me? Any guesses? Okay, so something a certified organic grower does or an organic grower does?
Not undisturbed. Like organic.
Okay, well, it's not what certified organic growers or organic growers do. Okay, that's pretty close. Organic growth is what naturally occurs without any intervention. I'm going to put some pictures up here, and I want you to tell me what you think this is, what they are. Is that organic growth? It's organic growth. It's no growth, but it's organic. Yeah, it hasn't been, there's no intervention. It's what nature can do with what it has. And something important to learn is that nature will always maintain the highest level of function that can be maintained with stability. And you'll discover that actually the level of function is pretty low now. And like happened to us in Colorado when the pine beetle came in there, weather conditions changed the stability of the system just enough that it destabilized it. It exceeded the threshold of stability, and the pine beetle came in and decimated millions of acres of pine trees. It's a very fragile thing, but nature will always try to maintain stability, to maintain balance. It's just a matter of what level it can maintain that. And when we plant a garden, for example, we come in, we plant a garden, we want to grow all these things in it and everything like that, and then we start having problems. What happened is we just exceeded the capacity of that system, that soil system, that growing system to maintain stability. And so we want to look at how do we increase the functional level and maintain the stability. We're looking at this. So everybody agrees that's organic growth? What about that? That's the same area. This is what that is. Table grapes, seedless table grapes. Hundreds of thousands of pounds of seedless table grapes are produced there. What do you suppose was lacking? Water. Now, they did some stuff for fertility there too, but water. But any water. They put a water line, and this is in the Kalahari Desert in the Western Cape of South Africa. These pictures. They put a canal. They put a feeder in from the Orange River over into this part of the desert, into these valleys here, and they irrigated it. So what was missing was water. They raised the functional level of this growing system by adding the water. What about that? Is that organic growth? Think so? That's what New Zealanders call God's country. The sheep. If the sheep weren't in the picture, it'd be organic growth. But with the sheep in the picture, it's not. This was a trick one. Why am I saying that? Because on the islands of Australia and New Zealand, they're void of cobalt. They have no natural cobalt in the soil there. Does anybody know what cobalt's required to produce? B12. B12. Who said that? Good for you. B12, cyanocobalamin, methylated. Yeah, a methylated. But the cobalamin part of it is the cobalt. Cobalt is the center atom in cyanocobalamin or B12. So what happened is when they first came to those islands, they saw this lush growth and everything, and they thought that'd be great for raising livestock, and they brought all the livestock in, and they were eating, and dropping dead because they no B12. They added just a few ounces of B12 or cobalt to the soil there. Now what they're doing now is they're just adding it to their feed. You'll see that in the States here too. They're adding cobalt licks or they're adding salt licks with cobalt in it to make sure they can produce the B12 in them. Sometimes I venture to talk about B12 here. I suppose I could trust you guys.
Fire away.
The official position of the church is what type of diet? Lacto-ovo vegetarian.
Oh, yes.
In other words, they include dairy. Does anybody know why?
B12?
B12. Now, let me ask a question. Were Adam and Eve on and I'm not telling you what kind of diet you should be on. I'm just asking you, were Adam and Eve on a lacto-ovo vegetarian diet? I don't think they were. So why are we not asking the question, why are we having to do something that didn't have to be done before? Yeah. So I'm going to say this, but I'm going to say there's conditions that are required for it. So I don't want anybody going out here saying Whitmar said, oh, I don't have to take B12 anymore because I can get it out of my food. If there's adequate cobalt in the soil and you're not killing your gut with eating foods that have all kinds of preservatives in them and everything, microbes in the soil synthesize B12 because all the microbes in the soil have to have B12 too. The microbes in the soil synthesize B12. And believe it or not, if we have time to talk about it, we'll talk about rhizophagy. The plants actually take up these bacteria into the plant. And the B12 winds up in the plants. But there are conditions that are required for that to happen. But we're not required to have a lacto-ovo vegetarian diet if we would understand how the natural system is supposed to work and what's required for that to happen. Now, you don't want to be like all that livestock on the islands of New Zealand and Australia if there's no cobalt, because the same thing will happen to you that happened to them, because you're not going to fare very well on it. But I just point that out to say we should be asking questions. If we're accepting something that's not what was from the beginning, then we need to be asking why. Why are we not doing that? There's all kinds of things like that. It's just now beginning to be understood. We're not getting anywhere near enough iodine. Yeah. And for a lot of people, you're getting way too much bromine and you're getting way too much fluorine, or bromide and fluoride. Bromide is used in all kinds of baking products and everything else. And if you don't have the iodine to displace it, bromine and fluorine will displace the iodine. Yeah. And then you're going to have hormonal problems and all kinds of other problems as a result of that. So we just need to be asking questions about what does God want for us? And then discovering how to achieve that.
I was just going to add to that same thought, and you were kind of alluding to that earlier about when we consume something, somewhat what we do to our soil, that we try to mask it with something to get that level up, per se, only to find out that what we did was suppress what our body would have naturally taken care of if we would have allowed nature and time to take its course and supplement it with the minerals that it was actually lacking. I find people, I hear the stories about melatonin all the time, and I'm like, do you realize that there's levels in your own body that your brain and your glands are constantly monitoring, and when you're taking these supplements, you're actually satisfying that need. And so your glands atrophy. There's no, I don't need to do it. You're supplying it to me.
Yeah, we're going to talk about that a little bit more. The excuse me. We're going to talk a little bit more about how we interfere with the natural process instead of imparting the right conditions so that the natural process can fulfill its task. We really undermine a lot of these things, and then we create all kinds of problems. Do you know how much money is spent on diets and supplements and healthcare and all of the fallout of, and when I say healthcare, the mental health issues, the physical health issues, and everything, as opposed to investing in the food that we eat that would actually nourish us and provide health to us? I did a research thing on this. It was several years ago now, but at that point, it was about, we're spending half as much money on food now as we did 50 years ago. Now that it's probably about 60, 65 years ago now. We're still spending about half as much money on food, but we're spending 10 times as much money on all those other things I just listed off. The thing is it kind of gets obscured to us because we pay our insurance premium and we don't see the real cost of these things. We're not really super conscious of the societal problems that are created, the productivity problems, the quality of life problems, and everything that are created by this. It's way cheaper to invest in nutritious food and have the benefit of it than it is to utilize all these other things to deal with the problems that are created by it. Again, you're fighting death again instead of fostering life on that. So this is not organic growth because of the sheep there. The sheep weren't there, it'd be organic growth, but animals and people couldn't thrive there. But I put this in here because you saw the other one, it was kind of obvious. Water was missing, right? Pretty obvious in the pictures. But in this one, it was a little of a thing that was not obvious, not visible, but was still a problem, still an issue.
How come? Because of the sheep, because of the manure, or because they eat the grass?
Because the cobalt was missing. They couldn't produce B12 in their rumen. And so they were dying because they didn't have any B12. Because it was not naturally in the soil there. It had to be added to the soil.
Barbara Stitt, she later married, I can't remember her married name, but she was a probation officer, and she had found that having a plant-based diet made a huge difference in her health issues. So she went to the judge and she said, anybody that you put under me, I'm going to put under a plant-based diet. And recidivism was 80% in most of probation situations. Hers was only 20, and a shocking turnaround. And then later, when she was married, she had a big bakery, I think in Minneapolis. She fed her employees one meal a day. It was a free meal there at lunchtime, just all the watermelon they wanted in the summer, and a plant-based diet. And an insurance guy said, what are you doing? You have the lowest rate of absenteeism of any company that we are working with. And she described it.
And we could make that 100%. Or zero, it should, the other way, it should be 0%. We are a long ways. I mean, we could just do dramatic things with people's health. And mental health is a bigger problem now. Body and the mind are one. I point that out to people. And we expend a lot of time and energy on spiritual realities to nourish our minds. Well, we seriously neglect, in all honesty, even if we're choosing the right diet, we gain benefit from that advantage, but we're seriously neglecting the opportunity we have to be physically nourished. Because remember that what I said that doctor said about what the physical nourishment did to them, to his family? Those were mental things.
They got along better.
Those were mental things. Yeah. They weren't just physical things. And again, I said we have this wide open door of ministry opportunity to the world relative to this.
In Bolivia, we had a young man with schizophrenia come. His mother came to work with us. And so my son-in-law said he needs to be working outside in the sunshine, getting lots of fresh air. And we put him on this really strict plant-based diet. And today you would not even know that he had been diagnosed with that.
It's just interesting to me that we have so much evidence of how beneficial these things are, and yet they're not embraced. I remember when I first learned the health message back when I was in my early 20s. I wasn't raised Adventist in my early 20s, and I learned the health message. And I'm like, why are they not teaching this in all of the schools? I know what I was taught in school, and it's nothing close to it. And I'm thinking to myself, I don't understand. Why are we not teaching people this?
Building bigger barns for our fruit.
Right. Yeah,
The lady said there's no money in it.
Yeah, there's lots of vested interest. You'll discover if you've been around on this planet very long. I'll tell you, I see some more gray hair in here besides mine. But the older you get in this world, one of two things happens. You either become very cynical and bitter, or you become very empathetic. And you understanding that humanity can't get out of its own way. It refuses to do those things that could heal, restore, but there's too many vested interests. And there's not money to be made on good health. And our economy functions on dysfunction. It's just the way it is. Okay. Is that organic growth? Well, no, that's not. Somebody planted that garden. Somebody deliberately is doing that. What about that? No. It could be if it was a remnant of Johnny Appleseed planting seeds throughout the land. What about that? No. No. Okay, so as people who are supposed to be exercising dominion, we have a choice to make. Intervention is necessary. The question is, what type of intervention? Are we going to impart the right conditions? Or are we going to impose ourselves on the system and exploit it?
This is usually imparted if you want to persevere.
Yeah. It's a system, if you're going to take, you have to give back. And when I talk a lot more to, well, I talk to both, but I talk a lot to market growers, and I point out to them when we're talking about this, you're expecting a lot out of that soil, and it's leaving. You're selling that produce, it's leaving. Are you putting it back? The most recent iteration of philosophy in agriculture now is regenerative ag, and I don't know if anybody's heard about that, but it's about using biology to reestablish, and there's some very good points in it. I don't want to be negative about the whole thing. But the bottom line is it's now utilizing biology, the microbes in the soil, to mine the soil. You don't need to apply fertilizers anymore. You don't need to apply amendments anymore. We can use the microbes in the soil. You have lots of phosphates there. You have lots of potassium there and all this. And I won't spend a lot of time talking about it. We may get that in one of the other presentations. But it's mining. It's exploiting the soil. And you should always be concerned when major corporations are all in support of a program. And they are. They're all in big time in support of that. So the question is there an ideal or model soil? What do you think? Was what God created random? Arbitrary? Now people confuse the foundation of something with the fruit of it. So the tree of life has how many manner of fruit? 12. So, and how many disciples are there? 12 sons of Israel. There are different manner of expression. So, we have a tomato. Tomato has certain flavors, textures, and everything. And most people I know like them. My son doesn't like tomatoes. And I know a few other people that don't. But what about a plum? Or a peach? Or a pear? An eggplant? They're different manner of fruit. But they all need the same foundation. the roots of the tree of life go down into one source. It's not, and so we need to differentiate those two things. God is never arbitrary about anything. He's never random about anything. He's very specific. And somebody were talking about the ark at lunchtime. Somebody had been visiting Noah's Ark there in Kentucky, the exhibit there. When God told Noah to build that ark, did he tell him to get a catalog of boats and pick the one he thought would work best? No. What did he tell him? He gave him the pattern and told him what to do with it. To follow it exactly. What about when Moses built the sanctuary? Then God provided a bunch of house designs for him, building designs and everything, and say, "What do you think will work?" No, he didn't do that. He said, "Here's the pattern, follow it exactly." What have we read in the Spirit of Prophecy about the medical ministry or the health work? Is there more than one way to practice it?
There's only one.
There's many ways to practice it, but what?
One that God approves.
There's only one that God approves of. How many models do we have? Did I hear 10?
Yeah.
3? 1. We have one model to follow, and you'll discover, I think maybe that's the next slide. Let's see. It is. You'll discover that there's universal agreement with what the ideal soil is. There's total disagreement about how you achieve it. This pie chart shows you an ideal soil, a model soil. And think about, as you're looking at this, think about God's creation of man. In the total volume of the soil, about 45% of it is going to be mineral material. 50% of it is going to be pore space, and half of that pore space is going to be filled with air, and half of it's going to be filled with water. And then about 5% is going to be organic matter, roots, microorganisms in the soil that are supportive of life. Nobody disagrees with this model. Everybody disagrees about how you get it. In fact, if you were to go to an agronomy 101, a soil science 101 class, an introductory class and everything, and they pull this up and tell you this is the ideal soil, and you raise your hand as a naive freshman and say, okay, if we don't have that, how do we get it? What do you suppose the answer is going to be? What was that? Chemicals? Believe it or not, the answer is going to be we don't know.
Oh.
That's the answer you'll get. We don't know. But we do know. Yeah.
What percentage of organic matter seems really low to me?
Well, there's some of these charts that'll put 40 to 50% mineral and 5 to 10% organic matter. Now, there's all kinds of languages that are used in communicating in different disciplines and everything. And so in this chart, the 5% is actually what's called colloidal humus or stable humus. In some of the other charts where it says 5 to 10%, it's talking about all organic matter in the soil, not just the stable organic matter in it. So if you had 5% of stable humus in your soil, it'd be like having 10% of total organic matter in your soil. So it's a little bit different language. It's kind of like the way the world is. You know, different languages, people can't understand each other. They're confused about all kinds of things because people have different ideas and everything. It's no different in agriculture. I could spend the rest of the day just talking about all the confusing things that happen within the agricultural world. It's unbelievable. So this is the ideal soil. The question is, so you need the dust and you need the air. And both the air and the water actually represent the Holy Spirit. And we could go into that, but it's but this is the ideal soil. And most people are going to tell you they don't know, but then everybody comes along and says, this is what you need to do, and this is what you need to do, and everything. But the bottom line is, are you addressing these conditions? And can you see anything else where you're going to need a little bit more information or a little bit more detail in there? Yeah, okay. Is it just whatever amount of different minerals you want to put in there? Or is it specific? Well, I'm going to tell you it's specific on there. Let me see what this next slide is. Okay, hang on just a second. In order to achieve this, you have to know how you achieve it. Okay, how do you get pore space in a soil? Anybody know? Pore space, or structuring of your soil so that it can breathe, so air can go in and out. How do you get that space in your soil? How do you get the drainage? Okay, organic matter is one way of doing it. The reason the big thing of the regenerative ag philosophy now is that microbes actually structure the soil by producing all these different glues and everything and aggregating soil particles together, and they do. They actually do, and that's a valuable part of it. But that type of soil structuring is very fragile.
Depends on what you're high on. If you're high in magnesium, then it's going to make a more compacted soil.
Well, yep, you're getting ahead of me. There's a lot of other issues here. The way you structure soil actually fundamentally is with chemistry. Calcium, magnesium, potassium, and sodium structure soil. Calcium flocculates it and creates aggregates that open the soil up. Magnesium, potassium, and sodium, all three, to some degree or another, disperse the soil and collapse it and tighten it up. And it's the balance of those minerals in the soil. Now, you still can have the microbes structuring soil. And we'll get into a little bit more about the problems with the regenerative ag philosophy. But by addressing this chemistry, you address the structuring of the soil. This is well understood. It is completely ignored in agriculture, but it is well understood. The drilling industry uses it all the time to drill for oil and natural gas and water wells, deep ones and stuff. It's well understood there. It's well understood in the water treatment industry. Calcium is used to flocculate solids out of the water when they're treating water to get the solids out of the water. They use calcium. But as I said before, well, maybe I didn't. Maybe I said it in the first class. Some of you might not have been here. There is not a single textbook that explains cation balance and how it structures soil. It's only looked at as a nutrient, which they're all nutrients. All four of them are nutrients as well. But the more important aspect besides the nutrition is soil structure. If you don't have soil structure, now, we're not going to go into detail on them, but there's 3 criteria that are going to determine how well an organism functions, whether it's microbes in the soil itself, plants, people, animals. One of them is electrical conductivity. And it's how many salts, soluble salts there are in the system that can conduct electricity. You actually want that to be fairly low. But in a lot of commercial agriculture, it's fairly high because you're putting all these soluble nutrients, these soluble salts on the soil. And it's high, and it's problematic. The other one is what's called oxidation reduction potential. It's directly related to soil structure. Soil structure is the dominant determining factor on what your oxidation reduction potential is. And, in a soil where you work it all the time, it's going to be too oxidized. In a soil that's not worked at all and has bad chemistry and it's too tight, it's going to be over-reducing on it. And there's a whole subject. We'll even get to a little bit more detail on that. And then the third criteria is an acid-alkaline balance, or pH. People look at pH, and pH only tells you how much hydrogen is there. Too much hydrogen is too acidic. Not enough hydrogen, and it's alkaline. But nobody ever asks the question, okay, if it's too acidic, what's missing? Is it calcium that's missing? It's an alkaline cation. Is it potassium? Is it magnesium? Is it sodium? Which one? You can have a great pH and terrible oxidation reduction potential. In other words, you can have terrible soil structure and a good pH because you have too much sodium. The soil is hard as a rock because it's high sodium, but you have a pH, you have a good pH. So all of these criteria have to be looked at all at once. In the modeling that I use, believe it or not, when you hit the target, balance the soil the way it should be, in the model I use, it lands right in the right place in all of them. Every single one of them. And then, just a sec, and then the soil microbes, people argue, oh, well, the plant roots and the soil microbes, they're going to change all that. And that would be correct. They're going to change all that. And so what you're doing is you're putting it at the neutral point. Basically, it's not really a neutral point, but it's a balance point. And so the microbes in the soil and the plant roots can change the conditions there to whatever they want it to be the easiest, with the least amount of energy and the least amount of effort to move it. So they might move it down to a really reducing acidic environment to fix nitrogen. They might move it another direction to do something else. I won't just do a bunch of them, but do you see my point here? Is where if you start at the balance point at the beginning, then you create a tremendous efficiency in that system because it can easily be moved wherever the plants that you're growing and the microbes that are necessary to function for that plant need it to move.
Are there different types of plants, and I'm talking about even undesirable plants that you might have that are markers for different issues? Instead of having to go and chemically test your soil, can you look at different types of plants growing on it, and maybe one that gives this is a good balanced soil, or oh, this one needs this, or this one needs this, based on the type of plant that's growing on it naturally?
The answer is yes. And in fact, people ask me this all the time. Well, do I really have to do a soil test? Because you get into a whole can of worms when you talk about doing a soil test itself. But do I really need to do a soil test? And my answer is no. But you better develop some really good observational skills. You know, farmers from 40, 50 years ago, my favorite one is a farmer that says, this field walks easy. It's a good field because it walks easy. What do you think he means? It's well structured. It's cushioned. So it walks easy because it gives under your foot. So that's what he's saying. It walks easy. It's well structured. And the plants that are growing there are telling you all kinds of things. And there's 4 different books I could tell you about that are written about this subject. But like I said, old-time farmers, that heritage is dying off rapidly, but their observational skills were tremendous. And I had an old-time farmer tell me one time in Tennessee, place I was at, when the peepers start peeping, it won't freeze anymore. Peepers are little tree frogs. And he said when the peepers start peeping in the trees, it will not freeze after that. I tested him for the next 2 years. I figured he was right all the way along, because the next 2 years, as soon as those tree frogs started peeping, it didn't freeze. Didn't matter what the weather people said. It didn't freeze. And so, yes, there's a tremendous amount of observation that can be done. You can smell, you can feel, you can see what's actually growing there. It's all telling you something about what the conditions are. Now, the dilemma with it is, how precise can you be at addressing it? And how much time do you have to develop that ability to do it? I don't think we have the luxury of that kind of time. It is possible. I tell you, very definitely it is possible. And I would encourage people, we're going to go through some of the insects and diseases and things like that. And show you some of these things. We're going to talk about some different plants and what they're indicating and everything. But George,
if anybody has a question, we're going live here. Please let me know, because I'm going to go next to you with the microphone.
Okay, sorry. Did everybody hear that?
Nope.
We're live. This is a live video, so he wants to use the microphone for questions so people can hear it.
Where can we order? Let's say if we don't purchase the books now, but where can we order all your things, like the books, the weed book, for example, which is very vital information? Where can we buy that, please?
we'll have to write them down. George has the one book, Weeds Control Without Poisons, over here. There's a book, Weeds, Guardians of the Soil by Joseph Kokenauer. There are Weeds and What They Tell by Jay McCammon. And then When Weeds Talk. Who's that one? Maybe that's McCammon. And then there's Weeds, or maybe it's Evan Fried Pfeiffer has another one on weeds on it. We'll have to. You have to go online and see. Some of them may be out of print, but you might be able to find a used one, like Kokenauer's book. No, I think Kokenauer's book got reprinted. Huh? Yeah. If you just go online and search for them, some of them are on Amazon, some of them are other books. But there's lots of information out there. The question is, you need to start from a point where you understand, what am I looking for? Because if you don't know what you're looking for, there's all kinds of things out there that sound wonderful. And they do have some value. And in some circumstances, they work really well until they don't work. Some other circumstances, and I was sharing this morning about the Back to Eden thing. In some circumstances, it worked out great. In other circumstances, it was a disaster. Because you're comparing yourselves among yourselves. And we're not supposed to do that. We need to have a model that we can look to and compare ourselves to that model, or compare our soil to that model and say, okay, what are our needs? What's our condition? And what's our condition need to be? And then you can go looking and see, okay, what's going to satisfy that need? What do I need to do to provide that condition? So let's say your soil is not structured very well. What do I need to do? Well, most likely I need to get more calcium in that soil to help flocculate it. How much? Well, when I was talking about EC, you need to know how big the bucket, I call it a bucket, but you need to know how big the bucket that can hold fertility in the soil is. It's called cation exchange capacity. But you need to know how big that bucket is. If you've got these soils here, I talked to somebody, I just want to know a little bit about these soils up in this part of Maine. And the bucket size here is between 5 and 9. That's low. So the capacity of the soil to hold fertility is not real high. So you don't want to put, let's say that this soil can hold a gallon worth of amendments worth of fertility. You don't want to put 5 gallons worth of fertility on there, because you just messed up your EC and your pH probably and everything else in the process. But what if you have a 5-gallon bucket capacity and you only put 1 gallon of material on? It's not going to work either. So these are criteria you need to know about your soil, so that you know, what do I need to do to bring my soil to the condition, its optimum condition. And there's things you can do, like for example, with the lower exchange capacity soils here, there are things you can do to make them more productive than their natural capacity is. When you talk about the parable of the talents, and the 1 talent and the 5 talents and the 10 talents, what did they do? They increased them, didn't they? There's things that can be done to help improve in those things, but you got to start from knowing what the conditions actually are that you're working with, and then going from there. Another question here.
Is there a soil test that you can recommend?
Yes, there's only one I can recommend. Now, I've had some people come to me and talk to me about the soil tests that they do up here in Maine, and I'm not familiar with them. And this is a whole subject to talk about, but the modeling that I use was actually established 100 years ago. And then with the Green Revolution, it was pretty much squashed. But you shouldn't be surprised if something that actually works and is helpful is not promoted. The truth is not promoted in society. It's suppressed. It's opposed. But it was established a long time ago, and I think God raised this individual up. It wasn't just him; it was a whole collaboration of people that developed it. But they went to nature. One of his things was he told his students all the time, study nature, not books. Now he didn't tell people not to read books. He didn't tell people not to study. But he said, if you've got a conflict between what you're reading in the book and what you're observing in nature, then I would believe what nature's saying and try to understand what's happening before I would. And he said, if you can do something in the lab, but you can't do it out in nature, then you need to figure out why before you just start implementing this. And I'll tell you the number one reason this started to be opposed He gave a speech. His name is Dr. William Albright. He was at the University of Missouri. He was a soil microbiologist. He developed this chemistry model. He's got a video that he did there. But he developed this chemistry model, but he was a soil microbiologist. His whole objective was getting the soil to the point where biology, where the microbes in the soil could take over the system and run it. That was his whole objective. But he gave a speech at the University of Missouri one year and basically said that if we will implement this fertility modeling, we will eliminate the need to treat animal diseases. We'll eliminate animal diseases and we won't have to worry about treating them anymore. And guess who was in the audience? The head of the animal science department at the University of Missouri. And from that day forward, what was in his mind? I'm going to lose my job. From that day forward, he opposed everything that he did. And it's been spread out and been opposed ever since then. He was almost nominated as the Secretary of Agriculture. If Dewey would have won, who was he going against? Yeah, if Dewey would have won, Dr. Albrecht would have been this agriculture secretary, and this whole thing would have been implemented into agriculture. But that didn't happen, and it's been opposed and suppressed ever since then. Yeah, and he was forced into retirement. And they don't talk about him at university. He has patents on the inoculants and everything for soybeans and legumes and stuff. All kinds of incredible stuff that he did, and they don't even talk about him there anymore. They don't. The funny thing is they have an Albrecht Day every year at the university because he was so prominent in so many things there. But they never listen to anything he says. It's kind of a token thing. Oh, yeah, we need to acknowledge this guy because of this and everything. But after today, forget about it.
Is much of his material still available?
He actually, the question was is much of his material still available? He only actually wrote one book.
Okay.
But there are several books that are compilations of papers that he wrote and presentations that he gave and everything that are available that somebody compiled and put together. Is it everything of his? No, but it's enough. He got to the point where he could. How much time we have here? I don't want to be messing everybody up. We're already done here. He could take like rabbits who reproduce fairly rapidly. He could alter their feed based on the fertility in the soil it was grown on. He could alternate that feed and take little scrawny rabbits and turn them into big, huge rabbits, healthy, vigorous rabbits. And he could take those healthy, vigorous rabbits and turn them back into sickly, scrawny rabbits just by changing the food, just changing the fertility, the food that they were fed, it was grown on, and everything. It was incredible, the incredible the work they did. But his thing was, we need to learn from nature, not from men. He wasn't excluding men from that, but if man's ideas were conflicted with nature's ideas, then nature got the nod, not men. So we'll continue with this, but there is a model. You asked the question about labs. There is only one lab in the world left that will actually run the analysis the way. What's that?
International Ag Lab?
No. It's actually Perry Ag Labs in Bowling Green, Missouri. Somebody mentioned Kinsey. Kinsey Ag Services is the only agricultural service that is utilizing that. Perry Ag Labs does it for Kinsey Ag Services. They're the only ones in the world that'll do it still. And even Perry Ag Labs runs an entirely different analysis in addition to that one. And at bottom line, it comes down to speed and cost. You can run faster and be cheaper if you change the system. You change the process. But if you change the process, now you're trying to measure an apple by an orange. It just doesn't work. So I can give people that information if they want to have it. I just want you to know I'm not here to try to drum up business, because you can go straight to Kinsey Ag and have them do it. I can do it. Alan Perry, who lives in Presque Isle, has done it as long as I have. He's right up here in Maine, if you live up in this neck of the woods. My priority here is to help you understand that there is a way that's right, and there's 100,000 ways that's wrong. And if you want food as medicine, this is the direction we need to go. And we're going to fill in some more of the details as we go along here. But so, okay, I'm going to go ahead and end, and then any other questions, you're welcome to do that. So if anybody needs to go or whatever, because I don't remember when the next class, is it 4:30 it starts? Anybody needs a break or whatever. Okay.